So translation. The Vishnu Murtis all had eternal, unlimited forms, full of knowledge and bliss, and existing beyond the influence of time. Their great glory was not even to be touched by the Jnanis engaged in studying the Upanishads. Purport. So as I said, along the purport, I will try to comment on what I found. Actually, I will just add to I will add because some of the verses are just mentioned, so I will read a little bit more about it. And most of the comments that I actually have is on hearing, which is last paragraph of the purport. So we'll see. I hope I'll have enough time to do everything that I planned. So, purport. Mere Shastra Jnana, or knowledge in the Vedas, does not help anyone understand the personality of Godhead. Only one who is favored or shown mercy by the Lord can understand him. This is also explained in the Upanishads, Mundaka Upanishad 3.2.3. Nayamatma pravachanena labhyo, namerasana bahuna shrutena, yam evaishya vrinutetena labhyas, tasyaisha atma vivrinute tanum svam. The Supreme Lord is not obtained by expert explanations, by vast intelligence, or even by much hearing, which is quite interesting because we're going to speak about hearing. He is obtained only by one whom he himself chooses. To such a person, he manifests his own form. And that is something that, because I'm reading for the moment, Chaitanya Mangala of Lochan Das Thakur. So I wanted to say how, I wanted to read one paragraph which also speaks about this, how it's actually impossible to know the Lord by studying the scriptures. And at the same time, we cannot know him but by studying the scriptures. First, we have to hear about him, because to develop love for someone, we need to know who this someone is. So to develop love, prema, towards Krishna, we have to get to know Krishna. And how do we get to know Krishna is by studying the scriptures that mention Krishna. So let me find this paragraph. So this is spoken by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So it's a conversation that he had with Murari Gupta. So Murari quoted a verse from Bhagavad Gita. I will repeat it here. Everyone please hear the words. In Bhagavad Gita it is said, "Indeed you alone know yourself by your own potencies, O origin of all, Lord of all beings, God of gods, O Supreme Person, Lord of the universe." This verse means, O Supreme Personality of Godhead, you alone know yourself. No one else knows you. Then Lord Gaurahari again said, "Do the Vedas have the power to know me?" In a voice choked with emotion, Murari replied, "Even thousand-headed Lord Anantashesha has no power to know the truth about you. How can the Vedas know the truth of your pastimes? O Lord, no one knows your glories." Hearing these words, Lord Gora again said, "The Vedas mock me." And then he explains how the Vedas actually describe him, and how sometimes you can get a conclusion that the God has no form, and so on and so on. But the point is that he reveals himself to the ones to whom he himself chooses. Even if we spend our whole life hearing, which is actually one of the processes of devotional service, we still might not be able to know him. But God is merciful. So he's very eager to bestow mercy upon his devotees, and therefore there is no doubt that if we perform devotional service, that eventually, through the purification of the heart, he will reveal himself to us. Okay, so to continue with the purport. One description given of Brahman is Satyam Brahma Ananda Rupam. Brahman is the absolute truth and complete Ananda or bliss. The forms of Vishnu, the Supreme Brahman, were one, but they were manifested differently. The followers of the Upanishads, however, cannot understand the varieties manifested by Brahman. This proves that Brahman and Paramatma can actually be understood only through devotion. So this is something that Srila Prabhupada will elaborate where all of this is confirmed. But basically, when a person gets to the stage of liberation, so when he is purified of the modes of material nature, then actually the devotional service towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead starts. And this is like the platform from which we get to know Krishna. So, and it's only, so he can only be known by devotional service, which means by spiritual activities. So, to continue the purport, this proves that Brahman and Paramatma can actually be understood only through devotion, as confirmed by the Lord himself in Srimad Bhagavatam. Bhaktyam ekaya grahaya Bhagavatam 11:14-21. So I also read that verse. This verse goes as follows: only by practicing unalloyed devotional service with full faith in me can one obtain me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. I am naturally dear to my devotees who take me as the only goal of their loving service. By engaging in such pure devotional service, even the dog-eaters can purify themselves from the contamination of their low birth. And what is mentioned in the purport to that verse is that such service must have Lord Krishna as the only goal, man nishta, must be rendered with full faith, shradaya, and must be unalloyed or without any selfish motivation, ekaya. To establish that Brahman indeed has transcendental form, Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur gives various quotations from the Shastras. In the Shvetashvatara Upanishad 3.8, the Supreme is described as Aditya Varnam Tamasa Parasat, he whose self-manifest form is luminous like the sun and transcendental to the darkness of ignorance. Ananda Mantram Ajaram Puranam Ekam Santam Buddha Drishyammanam. The Supreme is blissful with no tinge of unhappiness. Although he is the oldest, he never ages. And although one, he is experienced in different forms. And this is something that is also described, for instance, in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, because I was listening to the lectures of my spiritual master, His Holiness Niranjana Swami, and he was explaining, while reading Brihad Bhagavatamrita, about the opulences of Vaikuntha planets, and how Lord there manifests various forms. Of course, one of the forms is of the four-armed form of Lord Narayana, but also he there is manifested as Lord Varaha, which means that he has a form of a boar, Matsya, the fish, right, or the fish, also tortoise, and so on. So, and everyone there, when they come to the Vaikuntha planets, they actually assume the form of the object on which they meditate. And for instance, they also can obtain a human form because of the devotees who meditate on Lord Ramachandra. So he is experienced in different forms, and he manifests in different forms only for the pleasure of his devotees. So what is your desire in the devotee's heart? What desire they carry of the relationship they would like to have with the Lord? And if their love for him is pure, he will manifest himself in that form, and he will fulfill their desires about the relationship that they want to have with him. So, Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and all of his expansions and manifestations are also considered as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, God to whom we render service, whom we serve, and but what I want to point is that even though he is Bhagavan, who possesses the six opulences, he's the most powerful, the cause of all causes, he's also the greatest servant, in a way, when you think about it, because he sustains everything. He is everything. We are also part and parcel of Him. So He is also, as I remember this class of Shyamananda Prabhu, He is the fulfiller of all desires. He is a desire tree. So in the sense of what desires you have for rendering certain service to the Lord or to establish a relationship with the Lord, He is the one who will fulfill these desires. So if someone fulfills your desires in a way, He is also serving you with love. So there is a reciprocation always in this relationship. To continue with the purport. Sarve nitya shashvatascha dehastasya paratmanaha. All the forms of that Supreme Person are eternal. That's from Bhagavad Purana. The Supreme Person has a form with hands and legs and other personal features, but His hands and legs are not material. Bhaktas know that the form of Krishna, or Brahman, is not all material. Rather, Brahman has a transcendental form, and when one is absorbed in it, being fully developed in bhakti, one can understand him. Premajana churita bhakti vilochanena. The Mayavadis, however, cannot understand this transcendental form, for they think that it is material. So basically they think that all the forms that are in the world are created from matter, and even if the Lord descends to this world and assumes a certain form, they also consider this form material. And so transcendental forms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in His person are so great that the impersonal followers of the Upanishad cannot reach the platform of knowledge to understand them. Particularly, the transcendental forms of the Lord are beyond the reach of the impersonalists, who can only understand through the studies of the Upanishad that the Absolute Truth is not matter and that the Absolute Truth is not materially restricted by limited potencies. Yet although Krishna cannot be seen through the Upanishads, in some places it is said that Krishna can in fact be known in this way. Upanishadam Purusham, He is known by the Upanishads. This means that when one is purified by Vedic knowledge, one is then allowed to enter into devotional understanding. Mad bhaktim labate param. Okay, then we have another verse. Tatshradana munayo jnana vairagya yuktayaya pashyan tatmani chatmanam bhaktya shruta grihitaya. The seriously inquisitive student or sage, well equipped with knowledge and detachment, realizes that absolute truth by rendering devotional service in terms of what he has heard from the Vedanta Shruti. That's from Bhagavatam 1-12. The word Shruta Grihataya refers to Vedanta knowledge, not sentimentality. Shruta Grihita is a sound knowledge. Just a second. Because it is said, like, there is a verse which says that basically devotional service is based on the Vedas, on the Shrutis, on the Smritis, and on the Pancharatrika rules for worshipping the deities. So it's not a sentimentality in the sense that we concoct our own rules of how to worship the Lord. So there are some standards that we have to follow. And these standards of worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be found in the Vedas. And we know that Veda means knowledge. And Vedas don't contain just the knowledge about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They contain, actually, I heard once that they're given as the guidelines of how to live our lives here in the material universes, because they contain the knowledge of medicine, they contain the knowledge of how to conduct a war, politics, and so on. So basically everything that we need in life we can find in the Vedas, how to perform our activities in life, how to live a good life. So therefore we know from the Bhagavad Gita that there are 3 types of activities that the living entity performs. These are called karma, akarma and vikarma. So the karmic activities are actually the ones which are performed according to the scriptures. And if one is not living his or her life according to the scriptures, the Vedas, then he's actually performing vikarma, which are activities that are against the scriptures, and these are considered sinful activities. And there is another type of activities that the living entity can perform, and these are called akarmic activities, which means that they don't bring good or bad results. These are activities which are performed for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, actually, by performing devotional service. And so whatever we do in our life, if we do it as an offering to Krishna, then we will not suffer good or bad results in the sense of how it functions with the material activities. It will be actually looked at as a spiritual asset in our devotional service through which we can progress then towards a pure prema. Okay. So Lord Vishnu, Brahmadas realized, is the reservoir of all truth, knowledge and bliss. He is the combination of these three transcendental features. And he is the object of worship for the followers of the Upanishad. I was also hearing in one lecture how our deities that we worship in the temples and at home are actually the condensed version of eternity, bliss and knowledge. And these are eternal forms. Even though some might think, like, how can they be eternal forms because they're made out of matter? But this is also, again, the vision of the Shastras and the vision of the devotee Bhagavata, who sees the deity in the temple as known different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the Ishopanishad, in one of the purpose, Srila Prabhupada says how the deity that we worship in the temple is actually an expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that came to the temple. It's non-different from Lord Krishna, and it came out of causeless mercy just because his pure devotee asked the Lord to come. And then I think some of you know it, this famous statement of Srila Prabhupada when he was installing the deities in Australia, when he was installing Shishirada Krishna deities. I don't know their names, unfortunately, but then he apologized. He invited them to come and apologized that he knows that there's no one actually here to properly take care of them, but that if they can take care of themselves until devotees get purified. I found that very sweet and also shows the mercy of a devotee and the mercy of Krishna, because we say sometimes that the devotee is more merciful than Krishna, but Krishna also, especially in the form of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is very, very merciful. And we know that if we study the life of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we know the reasons why he came, but we know that he basically begged people, please accept this devotional service towards Lord Krishna, please accept these names. I'm giving everything for free. So he didn't ask anything. So in that sense, he is the most munificent personality that came to distribute the love of Godhead to the world. To continue with the purport, Brahma realized that all the different forms of cows, boys, and calves transformed into Vishnu forms were not transformed by mysticism of the type that a yogi or demigod can display by specific powers invested in him. The cows, calves, and boys transformed into Vishnu murtis or Vishnu forms were not display of Vishnu Maya or Vishnu energy, but were Vishnu himself. So this again proves this point how he manifests in multiple forms. And I mentioned how multiple forms can be also seen in Vaikuntha planets, where the Supreme Personality of Godhead is manifested in many forms according to the meditation of the devotee that that meditates on him. So he fulfills the desire of this devotee, and the devotee, in the end, even has the same form as the Lord. So in this sense, he also manifested in the form of the cows, of the cowherd boys, just to please his devotees. So we already explained in the lectures that were previously given by devotees how this whole lila happened for many reasons, for the bewilderment of Brahma, so that that his pride can be reduced in a way, because he thought that he can actually bewilder Krishna, but then Shri Radha Gopinatha ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai, Shri Govinda ki jai. So he thought that he can bewilder Krishna, but then Krishna showed him that his Maya is more powerful than Brahma's Maya. So therefore Krishna bewildered Brahma. We also know that it is explained, Kadambakananda Swami mentioned it yesterday, how as for Brahma Samhita, it's not certain whether it was spoken or sang by Brahma at the beginning of creation, when he received all the instructions of how to create these material universes, or whether he spoke Brahma Samhita after this lila. But I was searching a little bit, not very deep, unfortunately, because of the lack of time. But in Gopala Tapani Upanishad, there is a conversation between Lord Brahma and Narada Muni, and he actually explains to Narada Muni how he got this Gopala mantra from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and how in this mantra, in all the syllables that are in the mantra, the potencies of creation were hidden. And by chanting this mantra, he gained all the power of how to create the universe. But also by chanting this mantra, the Supreme Personality of Godhead appeared before him in the form of a cowherd boy. So it's not that Brahma never saw Krishna as a cowherd boy before. He saw him. But I don't know the details. It was just like my speculation. Maybe because of the influence of time, and we are tiny jivas, maybe, And also, Lord Krishna appears in one day of Brahma, and you know how many lives Brahma lives, and like when the creation actually happened, and so he forgot also. And when he actually saw him in this meditation, he saw Vrindavan, Gokula, in the spiritual world. So Krishna was there in the form of a cowherd boy, playing his flute and he was surrounded by the gopis and cowherd boys and the cows, and everything was made of chintamani and jewels and so on. So basically, maybe his vision of what he saw in the spiritual world was not corresponding to the earth, planet Earth, even though Vrindavan is beautiful and so on. But he couldn't recognize Krishna then, so that's why he tried to bewilder him. But because of mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna also wanted to show him that actually this is the boy that he actually saw. He wanted to manifest this form to him. So first he showed these Vishnu Murtis, which were presenting the double cows and the cowherd boys. But he presented these Vishnu Murtis for him to see that this is actually Lord Narayana, from whose navel he was actually born. And he manifested all his majestic power and opulences just to show him this Aishwarya aspect of the Lord. But then, after this vision, came another vision. So he didn't manifest anymore the Vishnu Murtis. Lord Brahma, it is said in this chapter, that Lord Brahma, he regained his external consciousness, and then again he saw himself as the creator of the universe. He saw this earth in the universe, and then Vrindavan, and then this cowherd boy in Vrindavan, which is Krishna, who was walking on the pasturing grounds and carrying a butter in his hand. So this was like the form which actually Lord Krishna wanted Brahma to see to show his sweetness, because the sweetness of the Lord is actually manifested in Vrindavan. So in that sense, this Leela was also like mercy, Lord Krishna wanted to show mercy to Lord Brahma and to reveal himself, reveal this sweetness on which actually Lord Brahma was meditating on before he created the universe. That was the vision in his meditation, this cowherd boy. So he wanted to show himself. So to continue with the purport, the respective qualifications of Vishnu and Vishnu Maya are just like those of fire and heat. In heat, there is the qualification of fire, namely warmth, and yet heat is not fire. The manifestation of the Vishnu forms of the boys, cows, and calves was not like the heat, but rather like the fire. They were all actually Vishnu. And we know from the whole chapter how the elder gopis and the cows, how they loved their children even more, because actually they wanted to worship Krishna, and their love increased. So this was the result of Lord Krishna manifesting in this way. So he fulfilled their desires that they worship him as their child, as their child, because the cows were also mothers of the cows. So factually, the qualification of Vishnu is full truth, full knowledge, and full bliss. Another example may be given with material objects, which may be reflected in many, many forms. For example, the sun is reflected in many water pots, but the reflections of the sun in many pots are not actually the sun. There is no actual heat and light from the sun in the pot, although it appears as the sun. But each and every one of the forms Krishna assumed was fully Vishnu. And the last paragraph, we should discuss Srimad Bhagavatam daily, as much as possible, and then everything will be clarified. For Bhagavatam is the essence of all Vedic literature. Nigama Kalpataror Galitam Palam. It was written by Vyasadeva, Mahamuni Krite, when he was self-realized. Thus, the more we read Srimad Bhagavatam, the more its knowledge becomes clear. Each and every verse is transcendental. So this is the end of the purport. So at the beginning of the purport, Krishna says how he cannot be only known by the Vedas or by the Upanishads. So he can only be known and obtained by one whom he himself chooses. But at the same time, we also mentioned how even though he cannot be only obtained by studying the Vedic literatures, this is the process of how to know him. And this is the process of how we can purify ourselves. And it is mentioned in text 3 of the first canto, first chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, how expert and thoughtful men relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Shukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. So this is, in a way, desire of Srila Prabhupada. So until he passed away, he left his body, he was still reciting Srimad Bhagavatam. So he wanted to point by this example many things. Amongst all those things, he wanted to point how important it is to hear Srimad Bhagavatam and how important Srimad Bhagavatam is for our devotional life. Especially because one of the processes of devotional service is Shravanam Kirtanam, and they are actually the most important because they are the ones who are purifying our heart. So by listening to the topics of Srimad Bhagavatam and by serving the Bhagavatam person, which is a pure devotee of the Lord who explains the topic of Krishna, everything that is the sin auspicious in the heart will be removed, and the devotional to the service to the Supreme Lord will be revealed or given, in a sense. So this is the beginning of devotional service and the end of devotional service, because by hearing we are actually getting to know the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and we are purifying our heart. But at the end of the devotional service, so-called end, when we actually develop prema and establish our relationship with Krishna, Shravanam and Kirtanam is something that is going on eternally. It is going on eternally in Vrindavan. What do the residents of Vrindavan do? They talk about Krishna all the time and hear about Krishna all the time, especially because of their mood of separation. So sometimes I think, even though all other services, all services are equal, and even by performing one of them, one can become successful, and this is what Srimad Bhagavatam explains, but somehow I feel for myself that hearing is the most essential and most important, because it affects the heart, especially when it's spoken by a pure devotee of the Lord. And we also heard many times when devotees were explaining how these purports are actually the ecstasies of Srila Prabhupada. So, and it's not only like his personal ecstasy of realizing Krishna. It also has a very nice meaning, which Srila Prabhupada explains himself in one of the purports of Srimad Bhagavatam, which I would love to read because it's very, very important and very, very nice. So in verse 4, 20-25, Srila Prabhupada says, in the purport of that verse, "A pure devotee always engages in the service of the Lord, taking shelter of his lotus feet, and therefore he has a direct connection with the saffron mercy particles that are strewn over the lotus feet of the Lord. Although when a pure devotee speaks, the articulation of his voice may resemble the sound of material sky, the voice is spiritually very powerful because it touches the particles of saffron dust of the lotus feet of the Lord. As soon as the sleeping living entity hears the powerful voice emanating from the mouth of a pure devotee, he immediately remembers his eternal relationship with the Lord, although up until that moment he had forgotten everything. For a conditioned soul, therefore, it is very important to hear from the mouth of a pure devotee, who is fully surrendered to the lotus feet of the Lord, without any material desire, speculative knowledge, or contamination of the modes of material nature. Every one of us is a kuyogi, because we have engaged in the service of this material world, forgetting our eternal relationship with the Lord as his eternal loving servants. It is our duty to rise from the Kuyoga platform to become Suyogis, perfect mystics. The process of hearing from a pure devotee is recommended in all Vedic scriptures, especially by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One may stay in his position of life. It doesn't matter what it is, but if one hears from the mouth of a pure devotee, he gradually comes to the understanding of his relationship with the Lord and thus engages in his loving service, and his life becomes completely perfect. Therefore, this process of hearing from the mouth of a pure devotee is very important for making progress in the line of spiritual understanding. So, we also mentioned 2 days ago by Namasankirtan Prabhu, he said that Bhakti comes from Bhakti. So only a person who carries Bhakti can give Bhakti. And this Bhakti is hidden in the heart of a devotee. And how can you know someone's heart? When a person speaks, actually, we can know one's heart. And then the realizations that come from the heart of such a pure devotee, if they enter the ear of a sincere listener, then such hearing purifies the heart. And then this, that's how I imagine it, this saffron particle dust of lotus feet of the Lord enter actually into your heart by hearing. And then you can experience this attachment and somehow the awakening of love of Godhead, only through hearing. And especially today, when the International Society for Krishna Consciousness is quite big, and spiritual masters, they have many, many disciples. And sometimes it's not possible to have a personal association with a spiritual master. And therefore, we have to realize how this hearing actually carries Vani, the instructions of the spiritual master, and how through hearing the instructions of the spiritual master, through hearing the Vani, actually we are serving our spiritual master. That's one thing. We are getting purification, and this is the association through sound. And through this association through sound, we have to one day come to the conclusion, as Srila Prabhupada came to that conclusion, when he said that never in my life was I ever separated from my spiritual master. That's what he said when Yamuna Devi asked him that, or maybe some other devotee also. But he said that he never felt separation from his spiritual master because he always remembered the instructions. So in the same way, because everything is very similar, if we hear about Krishna through the topics of Srimad Bhagavatam, we will get realizations about who is Krishna, of course. And also we will always associate with Krishna. And that's why it is also said how Krishna is always present where the devotees speak of his glories. So through hearing, speaking and hearing, he is present. Whether it's Krishna Katha or Kirtan or Japa, if we hear about him, then he is definitely present here. And I cannot not to mention one more thing because it's very inspirational. It's also about hearing, and if someone is interested to know the exact reference, I will have a look because I didn't have time, but I think it's from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, when he's actually mentioning how we should hear. He talks about 8 types of listeners. He mentions 4 types of listeners we should not be like, and the 4 types of listeners we should be like. So you can find yourself somewhere. But the point is that we become these 4 that I will explain at the end. We'll go through the inferior ones. So one of them is a wolf. So just as the cry of the wolf frightens the deer, which is attracted by the sweet sound of the flute in the forest, the foolish listener, whose loud noises create pain to the devotees engaged in hearing the sweet topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam, is called a wolf listener. So if we are interrupting, we're producing sounds while Srimad Bhagavatam is spoken, we are actually the wolf listener of Srimad Bhagavatam, and that's not something that is bona fide. So the wolf listener is somebody who is always interrupting those who are trying to relish the subject matter, and he is compared to the wolf, always making loud noises in the forest, which frightens the deer, which is attracted to the sweet sound of the flute. So the devotees, the pure devotees, are the deer, which are always attracted to the flute, which is the flute of Krishna, the topics of Krishna. So if he interrupts, then he is considered as a wolf listener. Then the second one is Burunda bird. I don't know this Burunda bird. It's some kind of like an eagle type bird living in the mountains, but I don't know it. I think it's maybe in India or some other places. So just as the Burunda bird that lives in the Himalayas, tells others whatever instructions it had heard without practicing it itself, so we should not be like that. So when we listen to Srimad Bhagavatam, to the topics of Srimad Bhagavatam, when we listen to the instructions of the spiritual master, we should actually also be an example and follow the instructions. So if we are not doing that, then we are like a Burunda bird. So one who teaches others but does not follow the instructions is called the Burunda listener. Then the third one. Just as the bull does not distinguish between eating sweet grapes or punjit oil cakes, the blind person who listens to everything but has no intelligence to discriminate between good and bad is called a bull listener. And then the fourth, just as the camel rejects the sweet mango leaf and chews instead the bitter neem leaves, one who rejects the sweet narrations about the Lord and hears instead mundane topics is called the camel listener. So these are 4 types of listeners, like camel, wolf, Burunda bird, and a bull. And this is something that how we should not listen to the topics of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And now I will mention how we should become and how we should relish and listen to Srimad Bhagavatam. So there are also 4 types of very good listeners. They're called superior listeners and are of 4 kinds, namely Chataka bird, then swan, just like on the dress of Shishirada Gopinath and Jagannath Baladev Subhadra and Shishi Goinitai, then a parrot and a fish. So the Chataka bird, we all know that she drinks water only from the cloud. Even if there is lightning, she will come to the cloud, thirsty, waiting for some water to drop. She will never go to any other sources. So in that same sense, the Chataka listener will never listen anything except the topics of Krishna. So it's a listener that is totally focused on Krishna and which only relishes that. The second one is the swan. So we all know that the swan is known by extracting the milk from water. So in that sense, the swan-like listener can extract the essence of the topics about Krishna from whatever he hears, actually. The third type of listener is a parrot. He's also good because whatever he hears, he repeats. So even if he doesn't understand, it doesn't matter. But he repeats. So that's the parrot-like listener. And the fourth type of the listener is a fish listener. And I was quite surprised, like, fish in the water, like, what does fish hear? But it's quite cute because the fish doesn't blink, right? It always has eyes focused totally on something. So in that same sense, when a fish listener hears about the topics of Srimad Bhagavatam, then his eyes are wide open and he's totally attentive and absorbed in the topics of Srimad Bhagavatam. And about these types of listeners, I found out in a lecture of my spiritual master, and then in the end, it was very nice because he gave blessings to everyone that please become like Chataka birds, please become like swans, please become like fishes, and please become like parrots. Make the hearing process about the topics of Krishna and Srimad Bhagavatam the aim of your life, because that's the only way, that's like the shelter, the safe place in this world. There's no other safe place, no other shelter from anything in this world than hearing about the topics of Lord Krishna. And this example was shown by Srila Prabhupada. So he showed it, it's like the whole Srimad Bhagavatam talks about what is the duty of the person who is going to die. So it was spoken in 7 days by Shukadeva Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit, who was supposed to be killed by that serpent bird, something, snake bird, yes. So Maharaj Parikshit gave an example of what a person who's supposed to leave this planet should do. And Srila Prabhupada also gave that example in his life, because until his last breath, he was speaking about Krishna. So so this is like also a tribute to Srila Prabhupada. Because even today, Srila Prabhupada's disciples, they can only have association with Srila Prabhupada through hearing. And I'm talking now especially about my spiritual master, how he relishes it. And because he relishes it so much, because he relishes it so much, he tries to teach his disciples to relish this hearing process in the same way. Because if we hear Srimad Bhagavatam, if we hear the words of pure devotees of our spiritual master, then there is no separation, and there is only purification, and then Krishna reveals himself. Yeah. So this is the last recorded purport, yeah?
Because they're all recorded, we can never see them.
Yeah.
This is one that is in the movies and never recorded. So.
Okay.
And it says, karma, karma hetu.
Karma hetu, if we engage in devotional service, we get a different nature, and if we engage in business of sense gratification, we get all cheese.
And then that karma is tad dehopalabdhi hetu.
Yeah. And according to the association of different nature, we get a body. Karanam gunasangasya satasat janmayoni. Therefore, we should always seek good association, devotee association. Then on life will be success.
And then last it says the gunas, satvadayo, jnana vikshepa moha hetavaha.
Then, if we live with good association, then we cultivate knowledge. That means association. And man is known by his company. So, if we have the chance of association with devotees, then our character, nature become different. By hearing, by discussing Srimad Bhagavatam, this Rajagun Tamagun are subdued. Then Satagun remains. Nasta prayasa over there. Nistam Bhagavatasya. Then Ratagun, Tamagun cannot do us harm. Therefore, varnashram dharma is so essential that people remain in sattva. Tamagun, Rajagun, Rajastama bhava increases lust and greediness, and that implicates the living entity to exist in this material world in many, many forms. That is very dangerous. Therefore, they should be brought into sattva, that is establishment of varnashram dharma. How to bring people in sattva, with Brahminical qualification, very neat and clean, rise early in the morning, this Mangalarati in this way, to stay in sattva. Everything is active, moving by the supreme desire of Krishna. This consciousness is Krishna consciousness.
So if you have any questions or comments about a lot of things that were said, I know. Yeah.
When Srila Prabhupada promised or asked Krishna, please stay here and forgive me that there's no one to take care of you, Prabhupada did that quite a few times. He also did that with Arya Jagannath.
Yeah.
When the installation wasn't very well organized, then Srila Prabhupada also asked, so please, first he said we cannot, this is a farce, we cannot install the deities in this way. But then he agreed anyway to install them, and he said, just please, Jagannath, stay here, with your blessings they will learn to take care of you. And then also in Bombay, when they bought the land, the first thing Prabhupada did was install a Radhadasi Vihari, and he promised there that he will build him a very beautiful temple. And that's why the devotees were so concerned about trying to finish the temple before Srila Prabhupada left. But they didn't manage, but still they managed to finish. But Prabhupada also said, I promised you, so I need to build this beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, the mercy of devotee and Krishna. So, thank you. Well, no, there are four. So the question is, which are four types of listeners?
Four types of listeners who are not good listeners.
Yeah.
The animals which
So the wolf, he produces, wolf, because he produces sounds in the forest. And he scares the deers, and the deers are the devotees of the Lord who are listening to the flute, in the sense Krishna. So the wolf. So the second is Burgundy bird. A Burgundy bird, sorry, but no, it's some kind of a bird, I don't know. I never saw it, sorry. So this kind of listener, he listens, but he never acts upon what he has heard or she has heard. And then, the bull. The bull. He doesn't distinguish between eating sweet grapes or some kind of an oil cakes. So he's like a blind person who listens to everything, but has no intelligence to discriminate between good or bad. So that's a bull. And there's a camel as the fourth. So the camel relishes the thorns instead of sweet foodstuffs. So in that sense, camel is a person who listens to everything without discrimination, and just what is painful, the camel thinks as sweet. Yeah. So we should not be like that. Yeah. Thank you. So the point, it was a very long purport who was speaking about the forms of Vishnu also, and how he can be known, and how he manifests in multifarious forms, and how the Jnanis and the Mayavadis cannot understand him, but only through devotional service he can be understood. And then in the last paragraph it is said how we should listen to Srimad Bhagavatam. And that's why I mentioned how the hearing is really important process of devotional service. For me, the most important, because in hearing, in association through the sound, there is no separation, even from the spiritual master and Krishna, and how Krishna is manifested, where the devotees speak of his glories. And then we set up what kind of listeners we should be. We should be chakora birds, swans, parrots, or fishes when we listen about the topics of the spiritual world.
You could imagine Sri Prabhupada writing or dictating these
Yeah.
long purports
Yeah.
after 21st of October, and it's 3 weeks before Sri Prabhupada left his village.
Yeah.
There's still 11 verses to go.
Yeah.
So these 11 purports with all the quotes and everything.
Yeah, because speaking is also remembering of what you heard. So in this way, Srila Prabhupada has association with Krishna and spiritual master, and that's why I was mentioning my spiritual master, because he's so immersed in hearing and speaking, and that's like his connection. So he wants to inspire others also.
I really like the parallel of Srimad Bhagavatam, the many lessons that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to learn, to hear Srimad Bhagavatam is so important, and the parallel to Parikshit Maharaj, also was listening today and very, very soon, and Shukadeva was saying, actually, I was supposed to, David Class was supposed to speak about it, but I completely forgot. There is little explanation why we celebrate the disappearance of spiritual master, disappearance of great Vaishnavas. Well, we never disappear. We celebrate the disappearance of Lord Chaitanya, the disappearance of Krishna. We don't even know what are the dates of disappearance.
Yeah, that's true.
There's no disappearance of Dragi. We don't know the disappearance of Nisima. We never celebrate those dates. And the explanation was given is that by the way the great teachers, by the way they leave, they teach us the last final lesson. And so the main, it's just like the summary of the whole teachings, and the summary of Prabhupada's teachings is being in a completely clear consciousness, dictating this final. And so many times Prabhupada reminded us that we're not together. So many times it's stressed. In hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, just as we were watching, by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, keeping the correct association, we can understand that the actually comes and no one can ever take from them.
Thank you for your comment. Yes. I will. He said that he liked this point of how that was shown through the example of Srila Prabhupada, how he was speaking Srimad Bhagavatam before he was supposed to leave his body, and this comparison with how Srimad Bhagavatam itself was spoken by Shukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Parikshit, because he was also leaving his body. He was supposed to be killed by that snake bird. And then he said how it's interesting that we celebrate the disappearance days of the great Vaishnavas, but we don't celebrate the disappearance day of Lord Krishna, Lord Narasimhadev, and so on. We know when Hiranyakashipu has left the body, but we don't know when, for instance, Lord Narasimhadev has left the body. And then you said that through the devotees that he leaves, right? Prabhu? Through the devotees that he leaves, who speak about his glories, he actually... Can you repeat? Because...
I mean that when we celebrate the disappearance of great Vaishnava acharyas, the meaning for that is that this day is a celebration because, well, first of all, they go back to Godhead.
Yes.
And by the way they go back to Godhead, there's also another lesson for us.
Yeah. So the disappearance day, that we celebrate is also glorious because in the way that they leave their bodies and because they go back to the Supreme Personality, go back to the spiritual world, but also it's a lesson for us of how to leave our bodies, and so that's why we celebrate it, and that's why we don't celebrate when, but anyway, I mean, Krishna is like, he's manifest or non-manifest, so basically he never leaves, even though Krishna left his body, he left like the body behind him just to bewilder the atheists and so on. But while you were speaking, I just remembered how this is so true, because once I was also on book distribution, and I was distributing Bhagavad Gitas, and I approached this girl in a shop and offering her a Bhagavad Gita, and she told me that she has a Bhagavad Gita. And I was like, oh really? What kind? So some kind of a conversation I started, and then she inherited the Bhagavad Gita that was written by her uncle, like by hand written, before he died. So he had nothing to do with the devotees. He was not a practicing devotee of an institution, but I guess somewhere in his life he got this knowledge, and he knew that how important it is to remember Krishna before he leaves his body. And so while he was sick and in the process of leaving his body, by hand he written the Bhagavad Gita. So it's quite, I mean, for me that was like, oh, wow, totally far out. It's like a confirmation of Krishna, and how these instructions, they really influence the heart of others. So just remember that. That was very nice. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.